Hi, and welcome back to Hiss and Tell. Today I am joined by journalist and author S.E. Smith for a conversation about pet loss and the way that we think about grief. We are going to discuss their upcoming book, All My Dead Cats and Other Losses, and what it means to carry the love that we have for our animals throughout our lives. As always, thank you for listening and being part of this community. If you've been enjoying the podcast and would like to help support it, you can do so through buymeacoffee.com/hissandtell or just our website, which is hissandtellpodcast.com. If you need help with your cat's behavior, you can find me at catitudeadjustment.com. Okay, let's go. Welcome to another episode of Hiss and Tell. I'm your host, Christina Wilson, and with me today is S.E. Smith, journalist and author of All My Dead Cats and Other Losses, coming from Harper One on July 28th. They also write the Tell Your Cat I Said newsletter for pet end-of-life advice. So welcome, S.E. Smith.
Thank you so much for having me. Always love talking cats.
That is what I do all day, every day, and it's nice to do it with some new people. So welcome. Can you tell us a little bit about your upcoming book, All My Dead Cats?
Sure. So the book is looking at the way that the United States and the world in general, but I'm really focusing it on US, really struggles with grief and loss and mourning and how we talk about these things, how they interact with larger kind of sociocultural themes, and how we can do these things better. I kind of ask people, what does good grief look like? We talk about the good death movement and how we want end of life to be, but also we need good grief in company with good deaths. And what I chose to do with this book is to use pet loss as kind of a gateway drug. So each chapter starts with a personal story about one of my cats and then uses that to branch into larger themes about grief, because I think that pet loss is more accessible for a lot of people than just plunging into human loss and cultural criticism and anti-capitalist values and all the other things you will find in this book.
Absolutely. Wanted to ask you about the title because it's funny, but it's also so upsetting at the same time. How did you strike that balance, and how kind of intentional was that balance of the title?
It was very intentional. I have extremely dark humor. So from, I think, one of the earliest stages of working on the manuscript, I was like, all my dead cats. Yes. And, it's funny. Often a title is a placeholder. It's very common for publishers to change titles, but they were huge fans of it from the start. And I think also it gives you a little insight into the kind of book that it's going to be. It's not inspirational schlock. It's not kind of very surface level self-help. It is a little more cutting and a little more sharp, and I feel like I wanted to get the deaf people who would get it to get it, and also hopefully to get the people who need to get it to be intrigued enough by the title to pick it up, although I'm sure some people are gonna be like, "Nope, absolutely not. This is not
Yeah.
for me."
Well, and I guess that's fair. It's kind of helping people self-select into your book that can find it and find things that are helpful in there. So in the book, you write that pet loss is often treated as a lesser grief. And I think all of us who have lost pets understand that. Why do you think our culture specifically struggles so much to sort of validate the loss of pets and mourning our animal friends?
So a few things are at work there. One is that culturally, we really devalue non-human animals. So we don't think of animals as having sentience, as having feelings, of having emotional bonds. We eat animals. We use animals as work animals, obviously without consent. A police horse doesn't wake up one day and go, I want to be a police horse.
Right.
So, and in many states, still, animals are literally considered property. So, in animal abuse cases, it's not abuse against the animal, it's like a property crime, which is sickening, right? So, culturally, if you think that animals are not valuable or not valuable in the same way that humans are, obviously, when they die, people don't think about them in the same way as humans. Another thing about pets is that they're very intimate partners inside the home. And many people may never meet your pets at all, or they see them very briefly, oh, I've gone on a walk with you and your dogs a couple times, or I visited your house and your cat has been there, but your pets may not be always as integrated into your larger social life. So people both don't meet your pets and don't see the intimacy and the depth of the connection that you have with them. There's kind of that internal inside the home, which is a larger theme I get into in this book because I don't think that grief is a private inside the home matter.
Right.
And also, more broadly, people are really uncomfortable with talking about any kind of death and grief and are super eager to avoid it at all costs. And Pets in a way are almost low-hanging fruit because, like, well, it's just an animal. I don't wanna think about the implications of what that might mean. So if I minimize the importance of that death, I don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, I that makes a lot of sense, and I wonder if you have noticed any differences between how people respond to someone who has lost a pet dog versus a pet cat.
Some interesting things there. I think often people are more empathetic when it comes to losing dogs, and there are probably a number of cultural factors behind that that would be really interesting to explore. One of which is this theme of dogs are man's best friend, dogs are loyal, dogs, again, are more likely to be outside the home, and so you're more likely to have met your friend's dogs and interacted
Right.
with them. I think also cats are very feminized. There's this idea of
Mhm.
the crazy cat lady, very internal to the home, this myth that cats are more standoffish, that they don't really form emotional connections with you. And so that definitely affects how people interact with the deaths of cats. And I think there's a really interesting quote from Cleveland Amory that I can't remember exactly what he says, so I'm paraphrasing a bit. Cleveland Amory was an animal rights activist kind of
Mhm.
in the mid-century who founded, among other things, the Fund for Animals and Black Beauty Ranch. And one of the things he commented was that we have all of these ways to tell dogs to, like, get out of your yard.
Mhm.
And with cats, we have a universal term, which mid-century was scat, right? Scat cat. And he said, I just find it very interesting that with dogs, we've decided there are lots of ways to ask them to do the same thing. But with cats, it's like we have the one thing that we do, which very much reflects, I think, how you value animals and the way that you communicate with them. And obviously, if you think of dogs as understanding more things
Right.
or as more kind of situationally dependent conversations, you are consciously or unconsciously valuing and weighting dogs more than cats, which isn't to say I love dogs. I love dog people. They are fantastic. This is not oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
It is not, we should care less about dogs. It's, we should care more about cats.
Yeah, I absolutely totally agree with that, and I do think it's an interesting point about language around animals and especially what people perceive the cognition of each species to be, because people do, as you say, seem to understand that dogs understand a bunch of different words in various human languages, but you're right about people. Only recently, I think it was maybe a month ago, a study came out about cats and how much of human language they actually can understand. And it's a lot that cats can even recognize in a multi-cat home. And the study was talking about how cats can even recognize each other's names in the home. And I see examples of that on a daily basis in our house, that cats who are best friends will wait until they hear their friend's name called so they can jump out and sneak attack them for a play wrestle bout, and which is so cute and funny. But I think if people are not even understanding that cat cognition can go as far as to understand a decent amount of language, that does lead to them being viewed sort of as lesser than dogs. What do you hope that people who are actively grieving could take away from reading your book?
So, for people who are actively grieving, and again, I feel like I need to stress this because some people see the title and go, oh, this is a book about pet loss. It's really
Mhm.
not. It is a book about all kinds of grief, especially human grief. But the big thing is obviously you're not alone, and also that there are a lot of different kinds of grief responses, and they are all valid.
Right.
It's not, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, there's no timeline for grief. And if you have people around you who are saying you're grieving wrong, or you should do this differently, or why are you still sad about this, those people are bad and should feel bad. You are the person at the center of the grief. There are lots of ways to process that loss, to think about grief as more of a long-term project that you move through and with, rather than
Mhm.
something that you need to immediately fix and get over. It's something that you carry for the rest of your life. I carry my ghosts, I carry my dead people with me, and I think people need to understand that. And to find commonality, I think there are some kinds of grief that people are very ashamed of or no one talks about, so they don't realize how common they are.
Mhm.
Certainly, anticipatory grief is a big one.
Yes.
And for people who are not grieving, I really hope the biggest thing you take away is the need to have grace and kindness and compassion for the people who are around you who are grieving, to recognize even if you don't approve of or you think the way that they're grieving is weird, that's a you problem. That's
Mhm.
not something you need to share with the class. To understand that if you're struggling with the way that someone is grieving, you need to talk to someone who's not the grieving person about that.
Right.
To really recognize that grief is ongoing, it's a collective project, it's not something that's going to end tomorrow or next week, and you need to keep being that supportive person. And also, really critically, to recognize Grief is not something that you can fix, which frightens a lot of people,
Mhm.
and you do need to be willing to just sit with it, and sometimes you just need to say, "Hey, this sucks. Dying sucks. All of this is terrible. I'm so sorry that this happened to you," and to just pause and be with that for a moment and not jump to like, "Okay, let's do this and this and this," or "You should read this thing or do this thing," is to just acknowledge it really sucks to see someone that you care about hurting and struggling and to know that there is nothing you can do about it, but actually being there for that person and really acknowledging that grief is doing something for them, and that thing is really important.
It's true, and I think especially in this kind of fix-it capitalist culture that we live in, it's difficult to allow time for people to just sit with it. Even to allow yourself when you're the one going through it, to allow yourself to just sit with it, I think can be difficult. So I one of my favorite things about the book was how you talked about how pets represent entire eras of your life of our lives and how you kind of set it up for each chapter, to be talking about a different pet. Can you talk a little bit more about that idea, like how pets are representing whole eras of our lives?
Yeah, sure. So I think the thing that most people can relate to is obviously a very high percentage of US households have cats and dogs. So
Mhm.
it is highly probable that you had a childhood pet. And that might be, in some cases, a kitten or puppy that came home around the same time that you were born. Could be an animal that was at any stage of life when you were a child or when you were adopted or kind of when you entered a household, which means you often grow up alongside an animal. And sometimes that means a very early loss. And sometimes it means this is an animal that was with you throughout your early childhood development and is a big
Mhm.
part of your experience. And in adulthood, I think it's very common when people are setting up their, first houses and apartments is okay, it's time to get a pet. And that's a big life change. So
Yeah.
pets often come into our lives at times of big change. And again, to this kind of intimate interiority, they are the people that we are closest to, with the exception of the other humans that we live with. And we have this deep connection with them that carries through with us. They provide emotional support. They are the people that we celebrate or mourn with. And so they're kind of these witnesses to these experiences in your life. And I think it's very common for people, you talk to someone who says, yeah, when we were living in San Francisco on Lombard Street in the 70s, we had Ace and Face, our two cats. And like they remember those cats' names because they were an important part of their family and the important part of the San Francisco apartment. So we
Mhm.
form memories around pets as well as eras and times. And obviously, it's not, pets have lifespans that are very different than ours as well. And I think sometimes there's almost a feeling of a closing of a door as you go through different phases of life. And sometimes,
Right.
very coincidentally, you have a pet who either comes into your life or dies right at a really important crux moment for you. I had this happen last year where a friend's cat died 3 days before he died in
Oh,
a just totally weird
yeah.
coincidence. But it was like both of them had decided, okay, this is the end of this era in a very final kind of way.
Oof. That's tough. So, one of the central ideas in your book is that that American culture fears mourning, which I've certainly found to be true. What does that fear kind of show up as in everyday life, do you think?
Gosh, it shows up in
I
all
know that's a
kinds of ways,
yeah. I know it's like a
but
please explain American culture. Go.
it shows up in people not showing up when you're grieving, in people only showing up for a short period of time and then expecting you to be over it, in the way that people challenge the way that you grieve and mourn. It shows up in things like almost no paid leave policies protect grief and loss. If they do, it is often first degree relatives, so parents or children,
Right.
so not your human extended family, let alone your animal extended family. It shows up in the way that we, again, are really uncomfortable with sitting with the fact that death happens and it sucks and that is just a reality of the world. It shows up in all kinds of policy. It also manifests in the way that we view some kinds of grief as more acceptable than others. The example that I keep coming back to is when a president dies, which is hopefully soon, it's very accepted that, like, you're gonna close down a whole city, right? There's gonna
Yeah.
be a motorcade, there's gonna be a procession, there's gonna be a ceremony at the cathedral. Often there are multiple ceremonies all over the country. There might be a national day of mourning, flags are at half-mast, like,
Mhm.
it is a whole thing. You have accepted that everything is gonna be shut down because this was a big deal. when you have a black man who's shot by police and people close down a freeway, it's, well, this is really disruptive. What if there's
Right.
an ambulance? What if someone needs to go to work? This is not the okay way to protest. Obviously, it's sad that this happened, but you need to find a more appropriate way to protest. And I think that is just a classic example of how much this country struggles with grief and loss and the expressions of grief that make people deeply uncomfortable. You think about when you see someone crying on a subway train, who is the person who moves to the next car and who's the person who sits next to them?
Right.
When someone in your friend group is really struggling, who is the person who comes to sit with them, even if it is literally just sitting and not saying anything? Who is the one who shows up to support them? And this also manifests across popular culture. I think you'll see, obviously, death and loss show up in a lot of television shows and books. And with episodic television, it's really interesting to me because you'll have this big deal death, and then it's like 2 episodes, and then it's just done.
Yeah.
And I think some shows do this better than others. And I think that really speaks to the way that we think about death culturally as something you put in a box and put away. And, I think to the kind of speaking of our how we value and don't value non-human animals when we get into pet loss specifically, very much long tradition in European culture of viewing animals again as not human, as not conscious, as not having feelings and emotional connections. I mean, people believed that animals did not experience pain.
I
So
know.
people were performing
I know.
vivisection on living
I
conscious
know.
animals and being like, I don't know why this dog is crying. Like, what's the problem here?
Or they would say that, "Oh, it's just it's a neurological response. They're just having a neurological response to a stimulus, but it's not any kind of consciousness that's happening here. It's just a neurological response." Just woo, people.
Yeah. It's just nocioception, right?
Very upsetting. So jumping off of that, so you write a lot about grief as being as a collective experience rather than an individual burden. So how could we rebuild communal grieving in this kind of isolated culture that we find ourselves in?
Obviously, talking about death and grief more often.
Right.
These topics tend to only come up in the very short term of, oh, you experienced a loss. We're going to give you your 15 seconds,
Mhm.
15 minutes of fame, right? And then we're going to move on. So integrating it into our daily lives, talking about it, talking about the way that grief is not just about a literal death, that there are lots of other kinds of losses we can experience in life that we should
Mhm.
treat as grief. Really making space for different kinds of grief, explicitly understanding that we're humans. Humans are very social animals, and that when you are isolated, grief can become overwhelming and can become really systemic. Whereas supporting each other, building community around each other, around people who are mourning, and again, around conversations. Like I love the death salon movement of,
Mhm.
yeah, let's hang out and talk about grief. And obviously, also to build a culture where there is less loss. We've really made a lot of conscious choices to cause death and suffering, and we do not engage and reckon with those things. So we are actively causing grief. And one of the reasons we don't want to talk about that again is colonialism, is
Mhm.
capitalism, is power and control. Because if you acknowledge, that there's a genocide happening in Gaza, that means that you have to be like, hey, this is wrong, and maybe we should stop doing it.
Right.
I laugh because otherwise I will cry.
I know.
But to engage with this kind of right to maim, acceptable bycatch culture, you have to reckon with the fact that we are causing pain, we are causing suffering, we are causing loss. Also, to see grief as a growth opportunity. It's not just loss and get over it. It's thinking about how fundamentally loss reshapes you in large ways and small ways, and how this is not about returning to a prior baseline, but growing with and learning things from loss, which means something that is an ongoing conversation and something that we continue to talk about and engage with throughout our lives.
Mhm.
And to just uplift more death positivity and more of these conversations, and seeing death and grief better represented in pop culture, in policy, in our day to day conversations.
Right. So what role do you think capitalism plays in the pressure that I think a lot of us feel to kind of move on quickly after a loss?
so many things. In the most immediate and practical sense, you have no value under capitalism to society if you are not working
Hmm.
or if you are not as productive as society wants you to be. And grief and loss tend to affect both of those things, sometimes purely from a logistical sense. Like my father died earlier this year, and I spent a week not working because I had to do a lot of immediate death stuff that needed to happen that week. It could not wait. And so I had to tell everyone that I worked with, I'm a freelancer, but I consult with a lot of organizations like, hey, I'm out this week.
Hmm.
Whatever it is you need me to do, it is not happening this week. And capitalism really does not like that because how are you contributing if
Right.
you're not working? So we see that reflected in obviously not good paid leave policies and the pressure to work through it or to return to work as quickly as possible. I mean, I know so many people who are like, "Hey, like, I'm at my dad's funeral, but I'll get right back to you later today." And it's like, "Girl,
Yeah.
you don't need to do that. Like, I didn't realize when I emailed you, I got your out of office reply. It's fine." So, to make more space for people who are grieving, to make more space in the workplace for talking about these things and to acknowledge, hey, someone might have experienced a big loss and they're back to work, but that doesn't mean that they're all good now. It's okay to be like, hey, I heard about your dog. I'm really sorry. That must have been really upsetting for you. To have more than just like, here's a condolence card, right? To have
Right.
some sort of collective acknowledgement. And obviously, that capitalist pressure of get back to work manifests itself also in the get over grief as quickly as possible because you're making people feel weird and gross and uncomfortable. And this kind of capitalism, imperialism, colonialism affect so many of our cultural values. And as I was saying previously, also capitalism causes so much suffering and grief. This is a machine that we are all trapped in, and
Hmm.
the production line keeps moving, right?
You mentioned that people in the workplace feel weird and gross when they think about someone that has grief. What do you think it is about death and grief that makes others feel weird and gross? Is it that it makes them have to comprehend that they're living in these weird meat sacks that are one day going to also die? Is it that they don't like to confront the feelings of others? Is it what is it that makes people so uncomfortable in this culture?
So many things at work there. Yes, obviously your own mortality, especially when it's a human death of like, oh, that is going to happen to me eventually. I think particularly when it's an unexpected or traumatic or, I mean, all deaths are upsetting, right? But, an out of order death, like someone who loses a child,
Mm,
it brings up a lot of feelings, right? And you also start thinking about the mortality of others. Hey, this person's mom died. Like, oh shit, my mom's going to die too. Or I think, especially with things like pregnancy loss or young children, are very taboo topics, in part because people almost act like it's contagious. Of
right.
like, oh, you had a miscarriage at 22 weeks. I'm pregnant. That could happen to me too. To be clear, I am not pregnant.
Yes.
Cosplaying as someone who's pregnant, right? But to be like, I don't want to think about this. This is really scary. And it is scary. It is super scary to think about the people and animals in your life that you love dying and not being able to do anything about it. This is really the ultimate non-preventable thing that
Mhm.
happens in your life. Also, people really don't like human emotion, particularly very expressive, intense emotion. I think you see that around other feelings, right? Anger, sadness in other contexts, emotions that are very intense make people super uncomfortable. And again, emotions that you don't know what to do with. Like, if someone is angry because Susan from accounting keeps eating their lunch, and this has been going on for 6 months, it's like, okay, there's a fix to this, which is to get
Mhm.
Susan from accounting to stop eating your lunch. You're angry, we fixed the problem, Susan has apologized, you're still annoyed that this happened and will have a permanent grudge against Susan, but like, problem solved. People want
Right.
solvable problems. And when people are presented with something that they think of as a problem that can't be solved, it kind of short circuits them. And also, there's this understanding of grief as a problem. Like, what if it's not a problem? The fact that you view it as a problem is an expression of your discomfort that is in turn making you more uncomfortable because we don't we don't like things that are open-ended. We don't like things that are unclear. And I think also because all of us have cultural values about what normal grief should look like,
Mhm.
when we see someone else grieving, they're not going to grieve the way that we grieve. And that also makes us uncomfortable and unhappy, whether it is, wow, this person's sister died and she's back at work 2 days later. Like, does she have a heart? Like, what is the deal? Or
Right.
this person's hamster died like 2 years ago. Why does she still have all of these photos all over her house? It's creepy, right? Like
Mhm.
we fear and dislike difference.
That that makes sense. I think some of that is also behind the like, when you hear that someone's died and then everyone has to know why. What happened? So that you can try to self-select out of that, like, "Oh, well, this happened to this person, that's not gonna happen to me, or that's not gonna happen to my loved ones." I always have found it so curious that when you hear someone has died, everyone has to know why or exactly what happened, I think, because they need to somehow make sure that that's not gonna happen to them, when really it's probably none of their business.
I think also it shows up as a weird form of small talk because, like, someone died. Okay, I don't know what to do with this information. I don't know what to say. I guess I could say I'm sorry, but I feel like I should have some kind of conversational Oh, so what happened? How did she
That's
die?
fair, yeah,
Like, which also a distancing tactic 100% of
right.
she died of COPD and I've never smoked, so that's not gonna happen to me. Or, oh, he died in a car accident, but I'm a super careful driver, so, he was probably speeding.
That's fair. So I want to talk a little bit about the opening sections of your book where you talk about how you sort of grew up in the charnel house in Greece. How did growing up around death so openly shape you?
Yeah, so I think as we were talking about earlier, kind of the uniqueness of American Northern European death culture.
Mhm.
In Greece, it's a majority Eastern Orthodox country, and the Eastern Orthodox Church has a very different approach to grief and
Mm.
loss. There is a lot of obviously, funerals tend to be a much bigger deal. Whole communities are engaging in grief as a collective project. There's this idea, certainly in the 80s when I was living in Greece, of, widows would keep wearing black for an extended period of time, sometimes the rest of their life. And this was very accepted. And also, there was much more direct contact with the body. Families would lay out the body would be at home. You could go visit the body. The whole village would take the body to the cemetery. So it was a whole collective death activity. And I really feel that having the body present, being able to touch it, being able to care for it is a huge difference culturally because you're confronting death in a very personal way. And kind of the ongoing care of the grave and the cemetery, one of the things that I write about. So the charnel house, for listeners who might not be familiar, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, some other faiths as well, when you bury a body, you later exhume it and you transfer the bones to an ossuary, an area where bones are stored. So people are usually present for the exhumation. Again, families will handle the bones. They're very careful about making sure that everyone is accounted for and is in the box. So you're getting a chance to connect with the body again. And the charnel house is a place that anyone can walk through and spend time in. And, especially in the summers, like Greece is hot as
Yeah.
hell. There was no air conditioning anywhere in the 80s. Obviously, a lot of houses are designed for that climate, but the charnel house was like cool and shady and was a very nice place to hang out if you were overheating.
Yeah.
And being around those bones, I didn't find being around bodies frightening. I didn't find expressions of grief and loss frightening because they were just part of daily life. They were
Mhm.
things that I interacted with regularly, and I definitely carried that into the US. I remember being so puzzled as a child in the US and still as an adult of like, it's a funeral, but there's no body present. What is happening here? Or
Right.
this person died at home. Why did the funeral come home and come collect them? Like, why are you not taking care of them at home? Or this person died in a hospital, so obviously you're going to take them home to sit with them for a while, right? Like, why are we
Right.
not hanging out with the body? I have questions.
Yeah.
And why are so many rituals around grief and loss obviously very kind of short and also not really engaging with that?
Yeah. I have one client who recently did have a viewing for their cat. They had their cat euthanized at home. And then they had, I think the next day they spent some time with the cat at home. And then they had a viewing. They gathered flowers from the yard from, the cat liked to go outside. And then they set it up and then had all their friends and family come and they had a little viewing and a little memorial. And I thought that was a very nice idea. And it was very nice that they had so many people who came to participate and kind of share in that. That was the one and only time I've ever heard of anyone doing that, but I
Do you
found
know a
that
few people
interesting.
who've done it? I love it. I love it when people do that. I think it
Yeah.
is a great way to honor animals and also to give people a chance, people who did have an emotional connection with the animal, like cat sitters or
Mhm.
A friend of mine is a vet tech, and someone invited her to her dog's viewing because they were like, "Hey, you've known this dog for 12 years. You
Yeah.
probably have some feelings about it, even though you met him in a professional context." So, big endorser of having ceremonies and rituals for pets that do involve being present with the body and involve the community as a whole again.
No, I agree. And do you have any other thoughts about kind of what should be included in memorial rituals? Like, should children be included?
I mean, I think so much of it is dependent sort of on an individual family's kind of culture and relationship to the animal, obviously. But
Mm-hmm.
one, yes, have some kind of ceremony. If you are really uncomfortable with bodies, you don't have to have a body present or you don't have to have cremated remains present. I know some people have euthanized their pets and had no interest and were just like, please take the body away. Don't want to think about it, which I think is problematic in its own way and would love to see cultural shift there, but
Mm,
that's like a whole can of worms that we don't want to open. But yeah, have a conscious moment to mark a death. Spend some time with photos. If the animal is present, have flowers, have photos, have its favorite foods. Let other animals in the household participate so they get to interact with the body as well. Spend time with the body too. It's not like, okay, my cat died. I got to get her in the ground in the next 12 hours. Like you can keep a body around for longer. You can use dry ice and refrigeration and other techniques if you want to
mm-hmm.
stay with your animal for a couple of days. I know some people have slept with their dogs and cats for the first night or first 2 nights. And to, yeah, welcome the community, welcome involvement, have an altar. And in terms of kids, 100% big enthusiast for having kids involved at their age and comfort level. You know your kids more than other people, right? But to
Mm-hmm.
not assume that children don't want to be involved or that they'll be traumatized. Again, if you're making death talk a regular part of the household, it's not like here's this big scary thing happening for the first time. It's,
Right.
hey, remember how we've talked about this? Cindy Lou, our beloved spaniel, has died. Do you want to spend time with her? Do you want to see what she looks like? Do you want to help plant a bush over her? Do you want to collect flowers? Do you want to pick out photos? Kind of involving kids at their comfort level because it's super jarring for children to just have a pet like disappear
Mm-hmm.
and for parents to be like, oh, she died. At least you hope they do that and don't lie, right?
Right.
But to give them an active chance to participate, not just in death care, but also end of life conversations and
Mm-hmm.
to talk with your kids about what is euthanasia? How does euthanasia work? What does it look like? To consider having your kids present, again, depending on what you know about your children and their comfort level, and to say, hey, you can be engaged with this. You can ask me questions. We can talk to you about what we are thinking about as we make euthanasia decisions and to get your thoughts about it. Obviously, with older kids, especially, teenagers and high schoolers, like should be playing a very active role in that process with a pet that, again, they might have grown up with and be very connected to. Something I do hear a lot from folks. People don't think of people in college as kids, but do
Mm-hmm.
have that familial child relationship to their parents who say, like, yeah, in my first semester at college, the family dog died. And it was just like, hey, Brody died. And there was no consultation, no opportunity for me to come back and visit. No, the health is declining. What do you think? It was just like,
Right.
by the way, this thing happened. So to ask people to ask questions, to invite people to participate is so important. And I think making this into a collective whole family activity is really important for everyone's mourning process. And it's a great way for kids to develop a more emotionally healthy relationship with grief.
I agree. So, since you mentioned euthanasia, I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Why do you think that so many people carry guilt after euthanasia, even when it was medically appropriate, it was compassionate, it was the right decision? What's going on with that?
Obviously, many things at work here. Probably the first one is that it's a very final decision.
Mhm.
Like, it is literally a life and death choice, and that makes it very, very permanent, and making permanent choices is scary. So, I think you probably see this in your own practice as well, that the number one regret I see from pet guardians is we waited too long. We should have
Absolutely.
euthanized earlier.
Mhm.
And that is a particular species of guilt that I think we should be interrogating more closely because people are reluctant to make that decision. Again, it's final. Like, well, she might have a couple more good days, or, she really rallied yesterday. I think she's going to
Yeah.
be okay. I see so many people just getting into this bizarre wishful thinking of like, bro, your cat is dying of kidney failure.
Yeah.
Sh- She's not going to get better. You've been doing fluids, you've been doing special diet. Like, this is a this is an inevitable trajectory here. So there's some, I think, kind of selfishness around keeping animals alive sort of longer than they should have, around the finality of this choice, around feeling like you're making a big decision for someone else.
Mhm.
And I think there's also this myth of the good death, right? Everybody dies naturally, and dying naturally is you go to sleep in your cat bed and
Oof.
you just don't wake up again.
Yeah, no.
And having both in my own life, in my work with animal shelters and at veterinary clinics, I have seen a lot of natural deaths, and almost none of them were like that.
They're
Most of
not
them
nice.
are
Yeah.
traumatic and upsetting and horrendous because the body will keep going
Mhm.
even under incredible pressure. And it's like, I see people with these pets who are suffering, and I just like grab them and shake them of like, do this final kind thing for your pet. We
Yeah.
have this opportunity to treat euthanasia not as giving up or as a failure, but this is part of the full spectrum and the continuum of care for an animal.
I
And yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head with I think a lot of people view it as a failure, and then I think there's just a lack of education around especially what the end stages of life are, especially for cats, because as most cat people know, cats are so good at hiding pain, at hiding discomfort. I know what I've heard from a lot of veterinary professionals is that it's always better too soon than too late.
100%. And I think another thing that people are starting to do a better job with is not just looking at quality of life scales, but assess your animal on a day by day basis. Like
Absolutely.
literally write down what you're seeing, and you're going to see trends that don't lie.
Yeah.
And I also think veterinary professionals really struggle with these conversations as well for a
Mhm.
lot of reasons. And I think vet schools are doing much better education now around end of life communication and euthanasia education and being open with clients about this is what the process is like. I can explain it step by step if that makes you feel more comfortable, but these are things to think about when you are making these decisions, and to be empathetic and say, hey, this is a scary choice and it's very final. And I get that it is stressful and it feels like you're going to make a mistake, but you know your pet really well. And I think if you were honest with yourself, you're gonna be like, "Hey, let's not just wait for the next good day," and then be like, "Well, if she has a really bad day tomorrow, then I'll call the vet."
Right.
And people don't seem to understand the value of, like, just make the appointment.
Yeah,
Just make the appointment,
it's true.
because otherwise you're just gonna keep on dragging it on. And the horrible thing that I see happening to a lot of people is an emergency euthanasia,
Yes,
because the animal crashes and you don't have time for the 9 a.m. euthanasia appointment the next day. Like, you need it right now. And that is a horrible experience to
it is.
have.
I think one thing that was it depends certainly on your animal's health, and when you have an animal that you or a pet that you know has a terminal diagnosis like we did with Steve, who had SCC, which is an oral cancer that's very fast moving. And we were able to sort of make a plan, if we see this, then this. If we see this, then this. How do we want him to have the best death that he can and the best life that he can? So we were able to, when we found out his diagnosis, make this plan, have him assessed by a hospice facility, have everything kind of go according to a plan so that when we were so emotional in our heads, we didn't end up doing that kind of like, oh, but this and oh, but that. We could just look at the plan and say, nope, according to the plan, this has happened. So now we're moving here. And I think if you have an animal who has a diagnosis like that, it can be very helpful to have a plan written out for how would you like this to go? How do you think your pet would like this to go? When you see these signs, what would your next step be so that when you get super emotional, you have something written down that can help you?
Yes. And I think veterinarians can be a really important part of that process too, of
Yes.
talking about these stages. And something else I tell people is like, you don't have to wait for your pet to get sick to think about what that's gonna
No.
look like for
Yeah.
you, and it's also with human death planning. Think about what you want your end of life to look like, what you
Mhm.
want your pet's end of life to look like before you are actively dying or facing a terminal diagnosis, because that's the time when you can really think things through. I think of this all the time with human advanced directives, where I'm like, you need to sit down and talk with your people about what you want rather than having them make these lurching from decision to decision in crisis, because this way they know what you do and you don't want, the level of intervention you do and you don't want, your tolerance in terms of stop treatment point. It's just so important, again, to talk about death and to be like, this is gonna happen. It can go
Mhm.
real bad or it can be sad, but fulfilling.
Right. Exactly. So How do you think, or why do you think cats become such emotional anchors for people? Is it because they're in the home most of the time? What do you think is driving that?
I mean, in the home, most of the time, obviously a big thing. They're living with you in very intimate ways. And I think there is something important in the human animal relationship, which is different than relationships between humans. So when you're talking about non human animals, there's usually less conflict,
Mhm.
right? You're not getting into fights with your cat all the
Right.
time.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're like, bro, get off the counter. Come on. Right. But you're not getting into these huge emotional, intense fights. You're not making big household decisions together. Animals are very tuned into your emotions. They're very responsive to who you are and how your day is going. When you're having a bad day, your cat is going to come snuggle with you and
Mhm.
interact and want attention in a way that humans around you are obviously going to be sympathetic, but sometimes it doesn't feel as intimate and as I don't wanna use a word like pure, but as selfless in a
Right.
way, like, animals are very connected to you, and I think also there is this thing around, this is a being that I'm responsible for, that I care for,
Mhm.
and want to make false comparisons because obviously human children are very, very different than non-human animals in your household, but that similar kind of feeling of protection and responsibility and care is a really deep emotional and cultural connection
Mhm.
that is super different from a spouse or a roommate or someone you work with or a friend, that I think society is also kind of bad at recognizing.
No. So, do you think that living with cats makes people more aware of mortality because they have such a shorter lifespan?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I have a firm answer on it. I think living with animals in general has
Right.
that effect on us because most animals have shorter lifespans than we have, and so we are caring and living with these creatures that pass in and out of our life more quickly than the humans around us do. So certainly a mortality reminder, but I think also people really dodge feelings of mortality as well. So there's
Mhm.
probably a side of, well, we expect cats to have shorter lifespans. So it's not surprising that Sadie died at age 15 because she's a cat.
Right.
So I expect that to happen. I, human, am going to die at 85. My friends are going to die at 85. We're going to be sitting on our porches at 75, waving our canes at those kids on the lawn, right? So you're both more aware because you see more death and almost less aware because it's like, well, that happens to animals, not to people.
That's fair. You wrote in the book that people often reach out to strangers because they feel like they don't have anywhere else to take their grief. What does that kind of say about how we function in society right now?
I mean, I think it speaks to our really intense desire to avoid grief and loss and these uncomfortable topics. So I
Right.
think this comes up for me anytime I do any reporting on pet loss. Certainly, as
Mhm.
this book is entering conversations, and I'm sure after release, I just get deluged in emails
Yeah.
from people who are so desperate for someone to just listen to them.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is literally, I know you're not going to respond, but, or
Right.
don't feel like you have to say anything, but people just want to tell that story and feel like someone is interacting with it. And there are kind of a lot of separate conversations to have about parasociality and putting that emotional weight on someone you don't know.
Yes.
But with pet loss, there is very much the, I feel like I can't talk to anyone, especially with people who have losses that are several years past, saying people are fed up with listening to me. And I still feel like I have not had a chance to really fully process this. And so, and I'm sure you get this as well when you do episodes about grief and loss, you get responses of, let me tell you about this, let me tell
Mhm.
you about that, let me tell you about this behavioral euthanasia that I'm still agonizing over. And it is just very much, you're scared to talk about death because you've had so many negative reactions.
Right. Do you think that social media has changed the landscape for people to be able to express their grief and talk about their pet loss? Like, where do you think social media kind of lands in this conversation?
Definitely, and I would say in lots of different ways that I find extremely interesting, because I notice some people who are involved in end of life with both humans and animals are more likely to talk about it on social media. So you get
Mhm.
little bits and pieces, and it kind of starts to normalize some of those conversations. As we were talking about earlier with Steve, like when your animal is well known on the internet and your animal is sick, it feels really weird to not say anything. So you want to
Right.
share something, but then sometimes you get into people are a little parasocial and weird about it, right? But
Yes, yes, they can get very weird. On Largely people, in my experience anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Largely, people were very supportive. There was, I'd say, like 5% of people who were absolutely batshit crazy and would be like, "Oh, you need to try this herbal supplement to cure cancer." And like, "You're crazy and you're torturing your cat and you should just shoot your cat." Like, people would just say absolutely insane.
Pocket
Yeah,
stuff, yeah.
just really crazy and then especially when he actually died, it got really, really crazy. But for the most part, the community was wonderful.
Yeah, so I think on the one hand, yes, we are normalizing these conversations. Social media is a fantastic platform for memorializing, for sharing information, for connecting with each other. I know so many people who've said when my parent was in the hospital, having that lifeline of just talking on social media really meant a lot to me, this kind of real-time support.
Mhm.
I think also, though, we get into some really interesting stuff around parasociality, into almost losing control of the mourning process. As you know, you have people making weird judgmental comments
Mhm.
or these really kind of like dramatic, over the top responses of
Yeah.
like, oh, I loved seeing her on my feed and I'm just so devastated. She was my favorite cat. She was so wonderful. And it's like, you never even met this cat. Like, I'm glad that you enjoyed seeing her on your feed and had a connection with her, but like, this is a little wild. It's like when a human celebrity dies and people like get really intense in
Yes.
it and have trouble separating, like, this is a person who people were emotionally connected to and lived an interior life. It's not just a public figure.
It does.
And I think also social media has some interesting and cool stuff happening around death. So there's Dead Pet Girls, who have an account on
Mhm.
Instagram. I love them talking about pet death. They started with talking about celebrity pet death, but they're opening up all these conversations. Another person I really love is Pot Roast's mom, who's
Yeah.
been very open and active talking about grief and loss with her cats, with the cats that she fosters. Another person I think of is the woman who has Little Corn. I don't know if you follow her on social media. I'll send you her stuff
Yeah,
later,
please do.
but she's a foster person. So Little Corn is a cat with kind of dwarfism and some
Mm.
congenital stuff going on that was initially a foster that she then adopted. And one of the things she specializes in is hospice. And so she's
Mm.
like, I am
Yeah.
deliberately fostering cats that I know are going to die, and I'm
That's so
talking about end
nice.
of life.
Yeah.
Yes. I think hospice is a huge and wonderful service for people who are able and willing to do that, for animals to have a caring home and to be loved as opposed to being in a shelter, having poor quality of life in whatever setting. And like sometimes you have a hospice animal that's like, it's been 4 years,
Yeah.
buddy. Like,
Yeah.
why? I'm happy for you, but like, this is not what I was expecting.
Yeah.
So I do think social media has made some of this more public and has get people thinking and talking more about loss and also educating people. I think a lot of people didn't even know that hospice was an option,
Right.
right? And think, oh, maybe this is for me. And so that is a really kind of lovely blessing side of social media. But the
I
blessing and a curse, as in all things.
of of course. I totally agree. It would be amazing if more people got into that work. Are there rituals or practices that kind of help you stay connected to the animals that you've lost?
Yeah, so I think like a lot of people, I do keep an altar in my house. I have
Mhm.
photographs, I keep cremated remains there. I also keep, favorite toys, I keep flowers on it. I kind of have a rotation of objects that meant something to those various animals. Depending on which cats are living at any given time, I will have something like Churu or Treats. Tricycle cannot control himself. I would have to have like a lockbox, so there are currently no Churu on the altar.
We have to have ours in a lockbox.
To make sure to actually consciously spend time with it. So it's not just a background thing in my living room, but something that I visit regularly. It's one reason I switch things up a lot because it gives
Mhm.
me a chance to, yeah, rotate the pictures, to visually change it, but also to reflect on the animals there. And I also am not wearing any right now. I should put some on before our call, but I do wear reliquary jewelry with remains. I've cremated remains, hair. One of my cats, Layla, they did not do the greatest job with the cremulator, so a couple of whole bones survived cremation, so I have jewelry with those that I wear
Cool.
to carry them with me, and I know I think that reliquary is getting kind of less stigmatized. To speak to Pot Roast's mom, she had Pot Roast skeletonized, so she has that skeletal taxidermy that
Mhm.
hangs out in her living room with her, right? But to literally carry them with me is really important, and to make sure just kind of to acknowledge the role that they have played in my lives at various various points rather than just being like, okay, cremated remains in the closet now.
Right.
Good luck to whoever cleans up after I die and finds like 80 dead
I know.
cats.
They do accumulate, unfortunately, because of the difference in lifespan. We have ours over. We have like a shelf above our bed, and we have ours there with all their little mementos and portraits, and this sort of the same as what you were saying. And I also have reliquary jewelry with cremains in them. So for got lots of them, lots of dead cats on my fingers. But
Yeah,
I
I always
find
love doing that at an event. I'm like, how many dead cats do you think I have in
I
this
know.
room right now? And everybody
Yeah.
freezes.
But it's nice to have them, I feel like, always with you in some way.
I think the big thing is just like talk about grief and loss and death more. Don't make it this scary thing that you only talk about when it's happening. Like that's traumatic for you and for everyone. And to stop thinking about it as an interior personal thing and to start
Mhm.
understanding grief and loss as a larger cultural phenomenon that we carry with us, that we bring throughout our lives, that we bring to the ways that we show up for people or don't show up for people. And that is also just so important to ask ourselves, not just how can we talk about grief and loss in daily life, but what are ways that we can make these experiences easier and how can we prevent these things? How do we prevent suffering? How do we confront the fact that some lives are valued more than others under capitalism?
Mhm.
What do we view as acceptable bycatch or acceptable for the cause? Why do we think that way? And so to think about these things not as private matters, but something we are all doing together.
Is there one thing that you think that listeners could do today to be better companions to people who are grieving a lost pet? Or just grieving in
Yeah,
general?
100%. If you know someone who has had a loss at any point in their life, after you listen to this podcast, text them. Be like, "Hey, I'm thinking of you. I know that you lost your mom a couple months ago, and people tend to kind of drop off. Like I
Yep.
had, my father died in February, and it's already like, oh, that was a century ago, right? But I had
Mhm.
someone who actually sent me a postcard that was just like, hey, just thinking of you. That meant so much to me. I will say, if you are a physical male person, that I think has even more impact than a text. But to reach out and say, hey, I'm thinking of you, or hey, remember that time that, the cat stole the roast off the counter? I just randomly popped into my mind. That was really funny and weird, right?
Yeah.
To have just let people know that you are thinking of them and to know like your door is open so they can feel like they can talk to you and get support from you and that you're going to be kind to them when they try to open up that conversation.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times people, especially in this culture, don't want to talk about it because they feel like, "Oh, I'm going to remind the person that they had a loss and I don't want to upset them." And I think that it's always, for me at least, it's always nice to have somebody talk to me about Steve and say like, "Oh yeah, I remember this and it was so funny." And that never upsets me. It makes me smile even if it makes me cry. It's so nice to like remember and to know that somebody else is thinking about him. And I just I just want to dissuade people from thinking like that they're gonna remind somebody of a loss because people going through a loss are always thinking about the loss, or it's always there.
Yes,
It's never gone. So it's not
they're always
like
aware.
yeah, it's not like they're just like, "Do, do, do," and then you remind them and you ruin their day. That's never gonna happen. So I think bringing up a nice memory is always something nice that you can do for somebody. Is there something that you would say to somebody who's listening who might feel ashamed of how deeply they're grieving their cat?
I mean, I guess big thing is do not feel ashamed. I
Right.
know it's hard to be like, don't feel this emotion that you're having,
Yeah.
right? But to say, this is something that society is imposing upon you, and you are surrounded by these pressures around the way we think about cats, the way we think about non-human animals, the way we think about grief and loss in general. And like, there genuinely is no wrong way to grieve. And if anyone is making you feel that way, they are a bad person who should feel bad, and you should not listen to them because they are wrong. It is okay to grieve at any level on your own timeline. I mean, I think there is a kind of a little side conversation there about if grief is becoming overwhelming and it is interfering with every aspect of your
Mhm.
daily life, if you have been unable to get out of bed, unable to feed yourself, just completely disrupted for 6 months, you should go to therapy not to get over it, but to think about how to process that grief and how to be with that grief in a way that is healthier. But
Right.
if you're mourning an animal deeply, that's because you deeply cared for them and they had a big role in your life. And it means a lot to continue caring for them in that way after death and carrying that legacy with you. And I would say conversely, too, if you have a listener who is like, my cat died and I didn't really feel affected at all, like, that's okay, too. You don't, grief looks different for lots of people. And maybe there's a slow onset, and 6 months from now, it's going to be this huge getting hit by a truck. Or maybe it's not. Like, it's okay to grieve however you need to grieve and to do that at any time on any timeline.
Right. My last question is, did writing this book change your relationship with your current animals? And can you tell us who your current animals are?
So my current animals, I'm kind of surprised that they're not in here hassling me, actually. So I
Same.
currently have I have Ash and Tricycle, who are
Mhm.
obviously both cats. One of the chapters in the book is named after them, and it is kind of the one about pre-planning and inevitability. And I'm like, you cannot die before July 28th. Cannot. Please don't. So Tricycle is he's just about to turn 2, and he actually was brought into the animal shelter that I kind of support with operations.
Mhm.
We think he was probably stepped on accidentally. I don't think he was a cruelty case, but he came in with just a completely shattered rear leg that Dr. Claire had to amputate. And a story that I'm familiar to many is I took him home because he needed to be monitored overnight, and then he just never went back to the shelter. And Ash is actually one of my fire cats. In 2017 was a really bad wildfire year here in Northern California, and Animal Care and Control, which is an open admission shelter, was being flooded with strays that were being brought in with evacuee pets. And the thing about open admission shelters that people really are uncomfortable with, talk about a whole separate conversation,
Yes.
is that they have to take every animal. They cannot turn animals away.
Right.
And so they were really doing their best. They had crates in the halls. They were reaching out to foster networks, et cetera, but they were like, hey, animals here where the stray hold is expired, like, we're going to have to make some choices we don't want to make here. So I went over the hill to animal control and I said, give me like your longest stay residents or the cats that you're most concerned about getting adopted, which ended up being Ash and Ember. Which I have to say, if you are a person who is thinking about adopting, please go to an open admission shelter. Please, please, please. They are such an important part of the
Yes.
animal care ecosystem. The work that they do is so critical. Don't be like, well, I could never adopt from a kill shelter. It's like they don't like that part of their job
No.
at all. So please make it so that they don't have to do it.
So can you tell us how people can find you, how people can find your book, how people can sign up for your newsletter?
Yes. So you can find me at Blue Sky. My handle there is semith.lol. Yes, I have a large collection of novelty domains. I can't stop myself. You can find my newsletter and information about the book at, get ready for it, allmydeadcats.com.
Amazing.
And my website where you can find more about my kind of larger journalism work, other books that I have been in, other fun Easter eggs is realsesmith.com, real as in the genuine article, REAL,
Right.
semith.com. And you can also find information on all of those places about how to contact me, including my P.O. box if you want to send me a postcard.
Amazing. And when does the book come out again?
It comes out on July 28th at all of the places where fine books are sold and possibly places where disreputable books are sold.
Ooh, I'd be very interested in those places.
Likewise.
Yeah, I like a disreputable book. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been such an interesting conversation. I feel like we could extract this or make this into like 57 more episodes about various different topics, but I'll settle for this one right now. And I really hope that everyone listening goes and purchases a copy of the book of All My Dead Cats and Other Losses and subscribes to the newsletter, which is called Tell Your Cat I Said. And thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was truly a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. If you're looking for one-on-one support with behavior issues like litter box problems, aggression, anxiety, or multi-cat dynamics, you can find me through my behavior consulting business, Catitude Adjustment, at catitude-adjustment.com. If you like the episode, please consider leaving a rating or review. It really helps us grow. For more episodes, show notes, and resources, head to hissandtellpodcast.com. Huge thanks to Cat Beats for the music, and I'll see you next time.